Behind closed doors at Adelaide Cottage, William and Catherine just made a decision that will alter the course of the monarchy forever. Sources confirm the couple has reached a point of no return following intense private discussions that have left palace officials scrambling to contain the fallout. The private talks that changed everything. The meetings began 3 weeks ago, quietly, without the usual fanfare or official scheduling that typically accompanies significant royal discussions. At Adelaide Cottage, the 4-bedroom home on the Windsor estate where William and Catherine live with their 3 children, a series of conversations took place that would fundamentally reshape the relationship between the Wales family and the institution they're meant to one day lead. These weren't the typical check-ins or routine planning sessions that occur regularly between working royals and palace officials. These were intensive, sometimes heated discussions that stretched late into the evening, with William and Catherine on one side and a rotating cast of senior advisors, courtiers, and occasionally King Charles himself on the other. The atmosphere, according to those with knowledge of the meetings, was tense from the very first session. What makes these talks so significant is not just what was discussed, but who initiated them. This wasn't the palace calling William and Catherine in for discussions about their roles or responsibilities. This was William and Catherine demanding these conversations, setting the terms, and making clear from the outset that they were no longer willing to simply accept how things have always been done. One source close to the couple described it as the moment William and Catherine stopped asking for permission and started stating their requirements. The first meeting took place on the evening of November 23rd, a Friday. William and Catherine had just returned from the school run with George, Charlotte, and Louis. The children were settled upstairs with their nanny, while downstairs in the sitting room of Adelaide Cottage, William and Catherine sat across from 3 senior advisors from Kensington Palace. The couple had prepared a document, several pages long, outlining their vision for how they wanted to operate going forward. The advisors, by all accounts, were blindsided by the specificity and the boldness of what they were reading. Over the following 2 weeks, the meetings continued. Sometimes they included just palace staff. Other times, King Charles joined via video call from wherever he was staying. On 2 occasions, Queen Camilla was present. Prince Edward, the Duke of Edinburgh, was apparently consulted as well, given his experience as a younger royal who has managed to carve out a relatively stable position within the family structure. Notably absent from these discussions was any representation from Buckingham Palace's old guard, the traditionalists who have long resisted modernization efforts. The meetings weren't just about abstract principles or future plans. William and Catherine came armed with specifics. They had timelines. They had contingency plans. They had researched how other European monarchies handle similar situations. They had consulted privately with constitutional experts. This wasn't a vague desire for change. This was a comprehensive proposal for restructuring how the heir to the throne and his family operate within the broader institution. Sources describe William as particularly forceful during these discussions. One insider said he was unlike they'd ever seen him before, not angry exactly, but absolutely immovable. He apparently made clear that these weren't negotiations in the traditional sense. The Wales were informing the institution of decisions they'd already made, and the only question was whether the palace would support those decisions or whether William and Catherine would move forward anyway. Catherine's role in these discussions was equally crucial, but manifested differently. While William took the lead in presenting their position and pushing back against objections, Catherine apparently served as both the emotional anchor and the strategic thinker, pointing out flaws and counter-arguments and offering solutions to potential problems raised by advisors. Multiple sources emphasized that this was very much a joint decision, with both the prince and princess fully aligned and equally committed to seeing it through. The turning point came during a meeting on December 7th. King Charles, participating remotely, apparently raised concerns about the precedent being set and the potential constitutional implications. William's response, according to someone briefed on the conversation, was direct and arguably shocking. He reportedly told his father that the choice was simple. The institution could evolve to accommodate the reality of modern royal life, or it could continue as it always had and risk losing another generation of royals. He made clear he wasn't threatening to leave, but he was absolutely insisting on fundamental changes to how his family operates within the system. That meeting ended without resolution, but something had shifted. Charles apparently requested time to think, and the discussions were paused for several days. During that pause, William and Catherine reportedly held their own private talks, just the two of them, walking the grounds of Windsor, ensuring they were completely united in their position and prepared for whatever consequences might follow. The final meeting took place on December 13th, just 3 days ago. This time, King Charles was present in person at Adelaide Cottage. The meeting lasted over 3 hours. When it ended, sources say, an agreement had been reached. The details of that agreement are what have sent shockwaves through the palace and brought us to this moment of no return. Because what William and Catherine demanded, and what Charles ultimately agreed to, represents the most significant shift in how the monarchy operates since the abdication crisis of 1936. What Williams and Catherine decided. So what exactly did William and Catherine decide during these intense private talks? What changes are so significant that palace insiders are describing this as a point of no return? The specifics are still being closely guarded, but enough information has emerged from multiple sources to paint a clear picture of just how revolutionary these decisions actually are. First and most significantly, William and Catherine have demanded and received approval for what's being called operational autonomy for the Wales household. This means that Kensington Palace, which technically falls under the broader umbrella of the royal household, will now function essentially independently when it comes to decisions about William, Catherine, and their children. They will no longer require approval from Buckingham Palace for their schedules, their public appearances, their charitable initiatives, or their communication strategies. This might not sound revolutionary to people outside the royal bubble, but within the institution, this is absolutely earth-shattering. The British monarchy has always operated on a hierarchical system where the sovereign's household ultimately controls and coordinates everything. Regional and junior royals have historically had to clear their activities through the central palace machinery. What William and Catherine have secured is essentially independence from that system while still being part of the monarchy. It's unprecedented in modern royal history. The second major decision relates to media access and palace communications. William and Catherine will now have complete control over all communications regarding their family. This includes decisions about which media outlets get access to the children, how and when family photographs are released, and what level of detail is shared about their private lives. The palace press office at Buckingham Palace will no longer have any say in these matters for the Wales family. This decision has apparently caused significant tension with the traditional royal correspondents who have long enjoyed privileged access to royal news and events. The so-called royal rota system, where a pool of approved journalists gets coordinated access to royal events, will no longer automatically apply to William and Catherine's activities. They'll choose which media to engage with on a case-by-case basis, prioritizing outlets they believe will report fairly and accurately over those with traditional royal access. The third element of their decision involves the children's upbringing and education. William and Catherine have secured an ironclad guarantee that all decisions regarding George, Charlotte, and Louis will be made by them as parents without interference or even input from palace officials unless specifically requested. This includes everything from which schools they attend to what extracurricular activities they participate in to how much royal duty they're expected to perform as they get older. This is particularly significant for Prince George. As the future king, there has always been an assumption that his upbringing would be carefully managed by the institution, with palace officials having significant input into his education and training. William has apparently made clear that while George will be prepared for his future role, that preparation will happen on William and Catherine's timeline and according to their methods, not according to some predetermined palace protocol. Fourth, and this is where things get really interesting, William and Catherine have demanded a formal reduction in their official royal duties. Yes, you heard that right. The future king and queen are asking to do less, not more. But here's the crucial nuance. They're not asking to work less. They're asking to do fewer ceremonial ribbon-cutting appearances and more substantive, long-term project work. William has reportedly been frustrated for years with the royal duty model that has him and Catherine constantly traveling for one-off appearances, cutting ribbons, unveiling plaques, attending receptions. He believes, and Catherine agrees, that this model is both exhausting and ultimately not very impactful. Instead, they want to focus their energy on a smaller number of causes and projects where they can make a real difference over time. Quality over quantity, substance over ceremony. This decision has apparently horrified some of the old guard at Buckingham Palace, who believe that royal visibility and the constant presence at various events is crucial to maintaining public support. But William has made clear he's willing to test that assumption. He believes the public would rather see their future king and queen doing meaningful work than constantly appearing at events that are ultimately forgettable. Fifth, William and Catherine have secured agreement that their charitable work will be restructured. Rather than maintaining dozens of patronages, some of which they barely have time to engage with meaningfully, they'll be consolidating their charitable focus into a smaller number of causes where they can be genuinely hands-on and impactful. This means they'll be stepping back from some patronages, which will undoubtedly cause disappointment and even anger among the organizations affected. The sixth major decision involves their residence and lifestyle. William and Catherine have made clear that Adelaide Cottage is their home and will remain their primary residence for the foreseeable future. They will not be pressured to move to a grander property that would require more staff and create more distance from their children's daily lives. They will not maintain multiple residences for show. They will not participate in the kind of elaborate royal household management that characterized previous generations. This is actually quite radical. When William eventually becomes Prince of Wales, there will be enormous pressure for him to take up residence at one of the grander Welsh properties or to establish a more formal household. He's apparently made clear that's not happening. He and Catherine will live where they choose to live, and they'll run their household in a way that prioritizes their family's well-being over maintaining appearances. Finally, and perhaps most controversially, William has apparently secured his father's agreement that when William becomes king, the monarchy will undergo further significant modernization. The specifics of what this means are still being worked out, but the principle has been established. William will not simply inherit the institution as it exists. He will have the authority and the support to reshape it for the 21st century. What ties all these decisions together is a fundamental shift in the power dynamic between the Wales family and the institution. For generations, royals have been expected to subsume their personal preferences and even their well-being to the needs and traditions of the monarchy. What William and Catherine have secured is essentially a reversal of that dynamic. The institution will now have to accommodate their requirements, not the other way around. That's what makes this a point of no return. There's no going back from this shift in power and expectations. The breaking point. What led them here? To understand why William and Catherine reached this point of no return, we need to understand the accumulation of pressures, frustrations, and revelations that brought them to these private talks in the first place. This wasn't a sudden decision or an impulsive move. This was the result of years of growing concerns that finally reached a breaking point in 2025. Catherine's health crisis was undeniably the catalyst that accelerated everything. When she underwent planned abdominal surgery in January of this year, the palace's initial messaging suggested it was a routine matter and that she would return to duties after Easter. But the situation was far more serious than the public was initially led to believe. Catherine's subsequent diagnosis and the preventative chemotherapy she underwent through the autumn months were devastating for the family and fundamentally changed how both she and William view their roles and priorities. Sources close to the couple say the health crisis forced them to confront questions they'd been avoiding. If something happened to Catherine, if she had been more seriously ill, what would William have done? How would he have managed being a single parent to 3 young children while also fulfilling his royal duties? And more fundamentally, what was the point of all this royal duty if it meant sacrificing time with family during moments that might be precious and finite. Catherine herself has apparently been profoundly affected by her experience. Friends say she's emerged from her treatment with a much clearer sense of what matters and what doesn't. The need to maintain appearances, to attend endless events, to please palace officials, all of that has been revealed as far less important than ensuring she's present for her children and taking care of her own well-being. She's apparently told friends that her illness gave her permission to stop pretending that everything about royal life is acceptable or sustainable. But Catherine's health crisis wasn't the only factor. William's frustration with palace bureaucracy has been building for years. As someone who will one day be king, William has always had more access and more insight into how the institution actually operates than most people ever get. And what he's seen has increasingly appalled him. The inefficiency, the resistance to change, the prioritization of tradition over common sense, the way decisions take months when they should take days, all of it has worn on him. Multiple sources describe William as someone who has been radicalized by proximity to the system. The more he's learned about how the palace actually functions, the more determined he's become to change it. He's seen good ideas shot down because they're not how things have always been done. He's watched as sensible modernization efforts get watered down by committees and advisors. He's experienced firsthand how the palace machinery can be more concerned with managing the institution than with supporting the people within it. The pressure of raising 3 children under constant public scrutiny has also taken its toll. George is now 11 years old, Charlotte is 9, and Louis is 6. They're at ages where they're increasingly aware of their unique circumstances and beginning to ask difficult questions. William and Catherine have apparently struggled with how much to tell them, how to prepare them for their futures while also allowing them to be children, how to protect them from the darker aspects of royal life while not leaving them unprepared for what's coming. The paparazzi attention, the social media commentary, the constant analysis of what the children wear or how they behave at public events, it all weighs heavily on William and Catherine. They've watched George being discussed as a future king before he's even hit puberty. They've seen Charlotte's every outfit analyzed and compared to her mother's. They've read speculation about Louis's behavior and what it might mean for his development. And they've decided enough is enough. Their children deserve better protection than previous generations of royal children received. King Charles's cancer diagnosis and treatment has created additional complexity. With Charles undergoing treatment through much of this year, his capacity to fulfill his duties has been reduced, even as he's insisted on maintaining as much of his schedule as possible. This has created a power vacuum of sorts, with various factions within the palace trying to position themselves and advance their agendas. William and Catherine have apparently been disturbed by the politicking and maneuvering they've witnessed, further convincing them that the system needs fundamental change. The reduced presence of Charles has also meant that more pressure has fallen on William and Catherine to pick up the slack. They've done so willingly because they understand the public expects senior royals to be visible and active. But the experience has given them a preview of what their lives will be like when William is king if nothing changes. And they've decided that preview is unacceptable. They cannot and will not live the way previous generations of royals have lived, constantly on duty, constantly available, constantly sacrificing personal well-being for institutional demands. There's also the financial aspect that's played a role here. While the royals are obviously wealthy, the way their finances are structured creates dependencies and obligations that William and Catherine have come to resent. The need to justify expenditures, to clear purchases with palace officials, to maintain properties they don't want, all of it creates a sense of being controlled rather than being autonomous adults. William's inheritance of the Duchy of Cornwall when Charles became king has given him greater financial independence, and he's apparently determined to use that independence to assert greater control over his family's life. The final straw, according to multiple sources, came in early November during a particularly contentious exchange with palace officials about George's future education. William and Catherine have been considering various options for George's secondary schooling, including some that would deviate from royal tradition. when palace officials not only offered unsolicited opinions but actually attempted to lobby against Wales's preferred choice, William apparently exploded. The confrontation made clear to him that unless he and Catherine drew firm boundaries now, they would be fighting these battles constantly for the next 2 decades. It was after that confrontation that William and Catherine made the decision to initiate the private talks that have led to this point of no return. They realized that incremental changes and polite requests for flexibility weren't going to cut it. They needed to fundamentally restructure their relationship with the institution, and they needed to do it now, while Charles is still king, and before the pressures of William's own future reign make such changes even more difficult. The institution's response and internal chaos. The reaction within the palace to William and Catherine's demands has been nothing short of chaotic. What sources are describing as a full-blown institutional crisis is currently unfolding behind the carefully maintained public facade of royal unity. The palace, an institution built on tradition, hierarchy, and carefully managed change, is struggling to cope with what amounts to an internal revolution led by the very people meant to be its future. At Buckingham Palace, the response has been split along predictable lines. The old guard, the career courtiers and advisors who have served the monarchy for decades, are reportedly appalled. These are the people who believe the institution's survival depends on maintaining traditions, protocols, and the hierarchical structure that has existed for centuries. To them, William and Catherine's demands represent a dangerous capitulation to modernity that threatens the very foundations of the monarchy. One senior palace source, speaking anonymously, described the mood among traditionalists as somewhere between panic and fury. They see this as the beginning of the end, a slippery slope that leads to the monarchy becoming just another celebrity family rather than a constitutional institution. They've apparently been lobbying King Charles intensely to push back harder against William's demands, arguing that the king has a duty to protect the institution even from his own son's misguided reform efforts. But the traditionalists are increasingly outnumbered by a younger generation of palace staff and advisors who actually agree with William and Catherine. These modernizers, many of them in their 30s and 40s, have long been frustrated by the palace's resistance to change. They see William and Catherine's demands not as a threat, but as an opportunity to drag the monarchy into the 21st century before it becomes completely irrelevant to younger generations. The modernizers point to polling data that shows declining support for the monarchy among people under 40. They point to the success of other European royals who have adopted more relaxed, accessible approaches. They argue that the Sussex crisis should have been a wake-up call about the need for institutional change, and they're grateful that William and Catherine are forcing the issue rather than waiting for another crisis to erupt. King Charles finds himself in an extraordinarily difficult position, caught between these competing factions while also managing his own health issues and trying to establish his reign. Multiple sources suggest Charles is genuinely torn. On one hand, he's spent his entire life within this institution and has a deep respect for its traditions and protocols. On the other hand, he's painfully aware of what happened with Harry, and he desperately wants to avoid a similar rupture with William. Charles has apparently been in almost daily communication with Queen Camilla about how to handle this situation. Camilla, who married into the family as an outsider and has her own complicated history with palace protocol, is reportedly sympathetic to William and Catherine's position. She's apparently been counseling Charles to accommodate their demands, arguing that losing William and Catherine would be catastrophic for the monarchy in a way that would make the Harry situation look like a minor inconvenience. Prince Edward has emerged as an unexpected ally for William and Catherine in these internal discussions. As the youngest of Queen Elizabeth's children and someone who has always been on the periphery of the core royal family, Edward apparently understands the challenges of navigating royal life without a clear central purpose. He's been quietly supporting the Wales position, using his credibility as someone who has managed to maintain a relatively scandal-free royal career, while also having pursued outside interests early in his life. Princess Anne's position is more complex. Known for her no-nonsense approach and her dedication to duty, Anne initially seemed likely to oppose William's demands, but sources suggest she's actually been more nuanced in her response. Anne has apparently expressed respect for the fact that William is thinking strategically about the monarchy's future, rather than simply accepting the status quo. While she doesn't agree with all of William's positions, she's apparently told Charles that the king needs to give his heir room to lead in his own way. The constitutional implications of William and Catherine's demands have sparked intense behind-the-scenes debates. Constitutional experts and palace lawyers have been working overtime to assess whether the changes being proposed actually conflict with any constitutional requirements, or whether they're simply departures from tradition that, while unusual, are legally permissible. The general consensus seems to be that most of what William and Catherine are demanding is within their rights, but that doesn't mean it's not controversial. One particularly contentious debate involves the question of whether William, as heir to the throne, has an obligation to prioritize institutional needs over personal preferences. The traditionalists argue that being born into the line of succession comes with unavoidable obligations that can't simply be negotiated away. The modernizers counter that the institution exists to serve the monarchy's purpose in British society, not the other way around, and that if the current structure isn't serving that purpose, it needs to change. The division isn't just philosophical, it's become personal and at times nasty. There are reports of shouting matches between senior advisors. At least 2 longtime palace officials have reportedly resigned in protest over the direction things are heading, though their departures haven't been publicly announced. Others are being pushed out or sidelined as it becomes clear that the balance of power is shifting in favor of the modernizers. The situation has been further complicated by leaks to the media. While details of William and Catherine's specific demands haven't been fully reported, enough information has emerged that royal correspondents are asking pointed questions, and palace spokespeople are struggling to maintain the usual policy of not commenting on internal family matters. Each leak triggers another round of internal investigations and accusations, creating an atmosphere of paranoia and mistrust. Foreign royal houses are reportedly watching this situation with great interest. The British monarchy has long been seen as a model, for better or worse, by other royal families. How Charles handles this challenge from his heir will likely influence how other royal houses think about succession and the balance between tradition and modernization. Some are apparently cheering William and Catherine on. Others see this as a cautionary tale about giving younger royals too much autonomy. What's become clear in all of this chaos is that there's no easy resolution. The palace can't simply go back to how things were before these private talks. William and Catherine have made their position clear, and they have the leverage of being the future of the institution. But the traditionalists aren't going to quietly accept defeat either. The result is a monarchy in internal turmoil at precisely the moment when it needs to project stability and unity to the public. The Harry and Meghan shadow. It's impossible to discuss William and Catherine's demands without addressing the massive shadow that Harry and Meghan's departure continues to cast over the royal family. The Sussex crisis, which culminated in their move to California in 2020, and the subsequent revelations in interviews, documentaries, and Harry's memoir, fundamentally changed how the palace thinks about family dynamics and institutional flexibility. And it's clearly played a significant role in shaping both William and Catherine's demands and the palace's response to them. The parallels between the situations are obvious on the surface. Both involve younger royals pushing back against palace protocol and demanding greater autonomy. Both center on concerns about family well-being, particularly regarding children growing up in the royal spotlight. Both involve questions about the balance between duty and personal happiness. And both have forced the institution to confront uncomfortable questions about whether the traditional royal model is sustainable in the modern world. But the differences are just as important as the similarities, and understanding those differences is crucial to understanding why William and Catherine believe they can succeed where Harry and Meghan ultimately couldn't. The most fundamental difference is one of position. Harry was the spare, increasingly peripheral to the monarchy's core function as William had children, and pushed Harry further down the line of succession. William, by contrast, is the heir. He's not optional. He's essential, and that gives him leverage that Harry never had. William and Catherine are apparently very conscious of not repeating what they see as Harry and Meghan's mistakes. They're not threatening to leave. They're not going to the media with their grievances. They're not making this about personal victimhood or attacking individuals within the institution. Instead, they're using William's position as future king to demand changes from within, operating through official channels and private discussions rather than public confrontations. There's also a crucial difference in what's being asked for. Harry and Meghan wanted to be half in, half out, maintaining their royal status and some duties while also pursuing commercial opportunities and living primarily in North America. The palace said no to that hybrid model, and in retrospect, it's clear that model was probably unworkable. William and Catherine aren't asking for that. They're asking for changes to how full-time working royals operate, not for permission to step back from royal duty entirely. That said, the Harry situation has clearly influenced William's thinking in profound ways. Sources say William has spent a lot of time reflecting on what went wrong with his brother, how the institution failed Harry, and how some of Harry's legitimate concerns were dismissed or ignored until it was too late. William apparently doesn't want to admit this publicly, given the current state of his relationship with Harry, but privately he's acknowledged that Harry wasn't entirely wrong about the dysfunction within the palace system. Catherine's perspective on the Sussex situation is reportedly more sympathetic than William's. She apparently maintains that while she doesn't agree with how Harry and Meghan handled their departure or their subsequent public comments, she understands the frustration and pain that led them to that point. Catherine has apparently told friends that she sees herself and William as trying to fix the system so that other royals, including George, Charlotte, and Louis as they grow up, don't face the same impossible choices Harry felt he faced. The question of whether William and Catherine's actions might open a door to reconciliation with Harry is one that palace insiders debate endlessly. Some argue that if the institution demonstrates willingness to change and accommodate legitimate concerns about well-being and autonomy, it might create space for Harry to reconsider his relationship with his family. Others argue that too much has been said and done, that the wounds are too deep, and that Harry's life in California is now too established for him to contemplate a return to any form of royal duty. William himself is reportedly conflicted on this question. He's deeply hurt by Harry's public criticisms of Catherine and of the institution William will one day lead. He feels betrayed by what he sees as Harry's willingness to damage the monarchy for personal gain. At the same time, sources say William misses his brother and wishes things could have been different. The private talks that led to this point of no return were apparently, in part, motivated by William's determination that his own children won't experience the kind of fraternal rupture he experienced with Harry. There's an interesting dynamic here where William is essentially validating some of Harry's concerns through his actions, while refusing to admit that publicly. By demanding greater autonomy, more privacy for his children, and a restructuring of how royal duty operates, William is implicitly acknowledging that Harry had legitimate grievances about the system. But William's pride, his anger at how Harry handled the situation, and his loyalty to the institution prevent him from saying so directly. The palace's handling of William and Catherine's demands has clearly been influenced by the fear of another Sussex-style crisis. King Charles and his advisors are acutely aware that if they push back too hard against William, they risk alienating the heir and potentially triggering an even bigger crisis than the one Harry created. This fear has given William significant leverage in these negotiations. The palace knows it can't afford to lose William and Catherine, but there's also concern that accommodating William's demands sets a precedent that could be used by other royals to demand similar flexibility. If William gets operational autonomy, why shouldn't Prince Edward? If Catherine gets control over communications about her children, why shouldn't other royals have children? The palace is worried about a slippery slope where every royal starts demanding special treatment, and the whole carefully managed system falls apart. The public's perception of these situations also differs significantly. Harry and Meghan became polarizing figures, with roughly half the public sympathetic to their position and half viewing them as entitled and disloyal. William and Catherine, by contrast, remain broadly popular. Recent polling shows approval ratings in the high 70s for both of them. This public support gives them additional leverage. The palace knows that if this situation became public, most people would likely side with William and Catherine over faceless palace bureaucrats. Perhaps the most significant legacy of the Sussex crisis is that it forced everyone to acknowledge that the status quo wasn't working. Before Harry and Meghan left, there was a tendency to dismiss concerns about the palace system as individual complaints rather than structural problems. It's much harder to do that now. Harry's departure, for all the pain it caused, at least opened up space for honest conversations about what needs to change. And William and Catherine are apparently determined to have those conversations and implement those changes while they still have the power to do so. What happens next? The monarchy's crossroads. So we've reached the point of no return. Decisions have been made, lines have been drawn, and the monarchy will never quite be the same. But what does this actually mean in practical terms? What changes will the public see? What happens behind closed doors? And most importantly, what does this mean for the future of the British monarchy? In the immediate term, the most visible changes will likely be subtle. Don't expect William and Catherine to suddenly announce a radical departure from how they've been operating. The implementation of their new autonomous approach will probably be gradual, tested through small changes before moving to larger ones. This is by design. Both William and Catherine understand the value of not shocking the public or creating unnecessary controversy that could undermine the broader institution. The first changes we're likely to see involve their public schedule and the types of events they attend. Over the next several months, expect to see fewer appearances by William and Catherine at ceremonial events and more focus on substantive project work. They'll be more selective about which invitations they accept, prioritizing events where they can actually make a difference over those that are simply about showing up and being seen. This will inevitably disappoint some organizations and communities who were hoping for royal visits. But William and Catherine are betting that doing fewer things well will ultimately generate more goodwill than spreading themselves thin. Communications around the Wales family will also shift noticeably. Kensington Palace has already been more assertive in recent months about managing media access to the children and controlling the narrative around family events. That trend will accelerate. Expect to see more direct public communication through social media and carefully selected media partnerships, and less reliance on traditional royal correspondence and the rota system. This will frustrate some journalists, but it will give William and Catherine more control over their family's story. For George, Charlotte, and Louis, the changes will be even more significant, even if they're not immediately visible to the public. The children will grow up with more protection from public scrutiny than previous generations of young royals had. Their appearances will be even more carefully limited. Their education will be managed with an eye toward their well-being and development as individuals, not just their preparation for royal roles. This is particularly important for George, who will grow up knowing he's going to be king, but hopefully without the weight of that knowledge crushing his childhood. Behind the scenes, the restructuring of the Wales household will take months to fully implement. Staff will need to be hired, systems will need to be developed, and relationships with Buckingham Palace will need to be renegotiated on a case-by-case basis. There will inevitably be friction and mistakes as everyone figures out how this new autonomous model actually works in practice. But the direction is set, and there's no going back now. The implications for King Charles's reign are profound. Charles waited longer than any heir in British history to become king, and he's now facing a situation where his heir is asserting independence and implementing changes that Charles himself might not have chosen. This could be seen as undermining Charles's authority, but it could also be framed as Charles being a modern monarch who trusts his heir to help shape the institution's future. How Charles navigates this will significantly impact how his reign is ultimately remembered. For the broader institution, this represents the most significant inflection point since Queen Elizabeth's death. The monarchy is at a crossroads. It can either embrace William and Catherine's modernization efforts and evolve into something more sustainable and relevant for the 21st century, or it can resist these changes and risk becoming increasingly disconnected from the society it's meant to serve. There's no middle ground anymore. The private talks and the decisions that followed have forced everyone to choose a side. The question of whether the monarchy can survive this transformation is one that historians and constitutional experts will debate for years. The pessimistic view is that by abandoning traditions and protocols, the monarchy undermines the very things that make it special and distinct. If royals are just like everyone else, just wealthy people with fancy titles, why should the public continue to support the institution? The optimistic view is that the monarchy's survival depends on its ability to adapt, and that what William and Catherine are doing is ensuring the institution's relevance for future generations. Other members of the royal family will also need to adapt to this new reality. Prince Edward and Sophie, Princess Anne, and even peripheral royals will all be affected by the precedent being set. Some will welcome the potential for greater flexibility in their own roles. Others will resent the disruption to established patterns. The family dynamics are going to be complicated for quite some time. The international implications shouldn't be overlooked either. The British monarchy remains influential among Commonwealth nations and is watched closely by other royal houses around the world. How this transition unfolds will influence conversations about monarchy and modernization in dozens of countries. William and Catherine's success or failure will be seen as a test case for whether traditional monarchies can adapt to democratic, media-saturated 21st century societies. There's also the wild card of public opinion. Right now, William and Catherine enjoy strong public support, but that could change, particularly if the changes they implement are seen as the couple prioritizing their own comfort over their duty to serve. The palace traditionalists who oppose these changes will be watching carefully for any missteps or signs of public backlash that they can use to push back against the new model. William and Catherine will need to be strategic and careful as they move forward. For George, Charlotte, and Louis, their parents' decisions today will shape their entire lives. They'll grow up in a royal family that operates differently than the one William grew up in, with more space for individual development and less pressure to conform to rigid expectations. Whether this makes their lives easier or creates different challenges remains to be seen, but at least they'll have parents who fought to give them choices and protect their well-being, which is more than many royals in previous generations could say. The next few years will be crucial. William and Catherine will need to demonstrate that their new model works, that they can maintain public support while operating with greater autonomy, that they can fulfill their royal role while also protecting their family's well-being. If they succeed, they'll have fundamentally reshaped the monarchy for generations to come. If they fail, the institution could face its greatest crisis since the abdication. The private talks at Adelaide Cottage have concluded, and there's no turning back now. William and Catherine have drawn their line, and the institution must adapt or face the consequences. The monarchy stands at a crossroads, and the choices made in these next crucial months will echo through generations, determining whether the crown evolves or crumbles under the weight of its own traditions.